Thank you very much, John. John invited me for lunch at the Rooms, which is the Provincial Museum in St. John several years ago. And over a good meal, suggested that I edit a collection of essays in honor of Sherry. And I thought it was a wonderful idea, never having edited a collection of academic essays before. It's herding cats, but it's out, and I'm so pleased with how it looks, and I'm so grateful to have all of our work available in color so that people can really appreciate the richness of the research that's involved. The book itself more or less wrote itself, because what I decided to do fairly early on was to create, through a reading of the book, a reconstruction of Sherry's own life history. Now, I only take up the story, early on, and in the introduction, I talk about her early life in the United States and her graduate work and her teaching at Johns Hopkins. But I only know Sherry really from when she moved to Montreal and started working at McGill in 1973. And so it is with that connection there that the collection of essays start. And we start with a wonderfully sad exploration of racial segregation created in the wake of an attempt or through an attempt to improve housing conditions for Black people in Chicago. The best intentions were there, undoubtedly, by some of the people involved, but also the worst. And the creation in the west side of Chicago of a new Black segregated ghetto speaks to the problems that are still with us in race relations in the United States. And of course, those are issues that were very important for Sherry in her own work on Baltimore. When she came to McGill, Sherry met Peter Holland, who was an environmental historian and geographer who worked for a short time at McGill and then went on to work in Africa and then back in his homeland of New Zealand. And for a number of years, Sherry and Peter collaborated on a variety of different environmental history projects and produced a number of articles. So the second of the essays that we have is Peter's exploration of what impact people had on the land in settling in the middle of the 19th century, the South Island of New Zealand. And why did those people transform almost completely the landscape? Why did they think it necessary to turn their back on an existing ecosystem and basically import from the north a completely different environment to create their farms? He discusses the ways in which farmers, the kind of constraints under which they operated, but also about their hopes and their plans and the ways in which, very interestingly, they would often have vegetation that was native to the island around their home, but all of the productive vegetation that they were introducing was imported. The article is an extremely rich exploration through using a wide variety of sources of an environmental process of settler colonialism that speaks to experiences not just in the 19th century and not just in New Zealand, and it very definitely speaks to many experiences here in Canada. Sherry has long been interested in questions around demography, and unlike many demographers, if I may say, she's actually interested in people, not just in statistics. And she's done a lot of work in trying to bring out the human character of demographic work. And so it was natural for me to turn to Daniel Govreau, who has worked perhaps longer than almost anybody else, in Montreal with Sherry on aspects of demography, and they have Sherry and Danielle and with Claude Bellavance and Hélène Vézina have contributed a really pioneering article which shows for the first time the richness of the new databases that have been created, which link census and birth, marriage, and death records for a great deal of Eastern Quebec. They do it through an examination of mobility in Three Rivers, Trois-Rivières, and in that study, they show that over half the population every 10 years is a new population. And so the change, the movement from town to country is not something, a one-time thing, it's something that continues all the time. And that sort of movement, these questions of how do people adjust to where they are, is of course central to Sherry's interest, but it's also central to the interest of Marc Saint-Hilaire. And Marc was mentioned by John. He's at Laval. He's an historical geographer, and Marc's contribution looks at the ways in which people who made their one of their most important decisions in life, who are they going to marry, and where were those people found that they married? So did they find them in their local neighborhood? Did they go great distances? How far were those distances they went? Were there differences between the marriage market, if we could call it that, in terms of ethnicity or in terms of religion? And he explores for the last half of the 19th century a myriad series of questions illustrated by wonderful maps showing the evolution over time of this very important human choice people were making. Then that brings us up more or less to the late 90s in terms of the work that Sherry was doing herself, and kind of when I started to work with her much more systematically through a research project that she created called Montréal, l'Avenir du Passé, which is an historical GIS and geographic information system research infrastructure for Montreal. And my own contribution explores the creation of the main St. Lawrence Boulevard as an ethnic buffer between a largely French-speaking East End and a largely English-speaking West End in the city in the last part of the 19th century. And I used many of the tools that we developed in Montréal Avenir du Passé to do that. Sherry has often been central to students working on the graduate work. She supervised a number of master's and doctoral theses, and they are listed in the book, but she also would cooperate with people, very, very generous with her time and skills, helping students work on a variety of different problems. And one of the people who most benefited from this contributed an article on the making of the gay village in Montreal. Julie Pudmore's study explores the ways in which we should think of this community as having a complex history, not simply a linear progress, which has been typical in the literature about the creation of gay neighborhoods in Western cities, but rather a process that is much more fraught with conflict and a variety of different perspectives on what it should mean. And she does that by looking at the election of the first gay alderman and the organization of gay parades, and also very revealingly what they did about questions around the red light district in the area. And finally, over the last number of years, Sherry has been working on the hotel industry in the 19th century. She's published several articles on the trade, and she's been very interested in the ways in which people come to a city and then leave, and this sort of networking that goes on. And she's been a pioneer in using networking software to do that. And so it's very fitting, I think, to have, as the last of the articles in the collection, an exploration of a hotel keeper in Montreal who was a woman and ran one of the largest hotels in the city and most prestigious hotels in the city for more than a decade. And it's a very careful reconstruction of her life by Marianne Poutanen, which attempts to more than attempts, it shows us the complexities and challenges that women faced in taking their skills from the domestic sphere into an area where those skills can be monetized, and what sorts of issues and problems that they encounter when they did that in the middle of the 19th century. So what we have is 7 quite distinct studies, and they show the great variety of interests that Sherry has developed, but they also all show, I think, the importance that understanding time and space by sharing our experiences with other scholars, something that has defined Sherry's career. Thank you.
Bonjour à tous. Je voudrais d'abord remercier les organisateurs de ce lancement de me donner l'occasion de dire quelques mots. C'est un plaisir et un honneur. Je voudrais aussi saluer spécialement Robert Sweeny, qui est le maître d'œuvre de cet ouvrage, et mentionner la passionnante introduction dont il est l'auteur dans cet ouvrage, et qui relate la carrière de Sherry Olson. Il n'en a pas fait mention dans sa présentation de l'ouvrage, par modestie, j'imagine. Alors, je le mentionne et j'invite tout le monde à aller lire cette passionnante introduction. Je voudrais m'inspirer du très beau titre de l'ouvrage « Sharing Spaces » pour évoquer certains traits de la contribution de Sherry au paysage intellectuel québécois et canadien. À plus d'un titre, Sherry a occupé et partagé des espaces riches et variés au cours de sa longue carrière. Elle les a nourris et elle les a façonnés de plus d'une manière. D'abord des espaces interdisciplinaires en lien avec la géographie, l'histoire, la démographie et la sociologie. Comprendre le monde dans lequel on vit et dans lequel ont vécu ceux et celles qui nous ont précédés ne connaît pas de frontières disciplinaires. Il faut aller là où nous porte notre enquête en mettant à profit les méthodes les plus appropriées pour la mener à bien. Et c'est certainement ce qui a guidé Sherry. Sherry a aussi habité des espaces culturels et linguistiques variés, autant francophones qu'anglophones, que ce soit à l'échelle du Québec, du Canada ou à celle internationale. Une partie d'elle-même bien ancrée à l'Université McGill, une autre à Concordia avec sa collègue Pat Thornton et plus tard avec moi-même, une autre à l'UQAM avec notamment Jean-Claude Robert, Paul-André Linteau, Joanne Burgess, une autre partie d'elle-même encore à l'Université Laval et à l'UQTR avec le SIEC dont elle fut un membre fondateur. Elle a occupé ces espaces intellectuels en créant des ponts, en ouvrant des frontières qui s'érigent trop souvent entre différentes traditions, différentes écoles. Sherry a aussi occupé des espaces où évoluaient différents acteurs. Et je veux mentionner particulièrement, comme certains l'ont fait aussi avant moi, ceux de la relève, les étudiants, les jeunes chercheurs, nombreux à avoir bénéficié d'un conseil, d'une lettre de référence ou encore d'une évaluation toujours constructive à un moment ou l'autre de leur carrière. Pour l'histoire de la population du Québec, le travail colossal qu'elle et sa collègue Pat Thornton ont réalisé sur Montréal constitue une avancée remarquable. Elles ont utilisé un éventail de sources, élaboré des méthodes inventives pour dévoiler et comprendre la démographie de la métropole industrielle du Canada. Ce travail constitue aussi un modèle d'intersectionnalité avant l'heure. Genre, classe et culture s'y imbriquent dans le temps et dans l'espace pour comprendre ce qui anime et transforme cette ville. Dans cette étude fouillée, derrière les statistiques, on découvre à chaque détour des gens profondément humains qui luttent pour leur survie, élaborent des stratégies pour améliorer leur sort, y parviennent parfois mais pas toujours, mais des gens profondément vivants. Sherry, c'est donc la chercheure passionnée, sensible, infatigable. Pour relater, samedi dernier, encore en moins de 24 heures, elle me retournait ses commentaires sur une planche qui sera bientôt publiée dans un atlas du siècle. Alors, Sherry a aussi été extrêmement inventive, toujours avec la méthode au service de l'objectif de recherche poursuivi, et toujours à travers tout ça, profondément généreuse et attachante.